Hey everybody, today we're going to do a commentary on a topic I did have listed to do, but I also got it suggested to me by a friend on Twitter. And that topic is, why do Marvel and DC fans hate each other so much? And specifically, why do people hate each other's taste in movies or music, or get angry when somebody doesn't know something they like? It's all covered under the same umbrella, and we're going to get into that. Now, I have talked about this before. We did the video very early on called Why Do People Argue About Movies? And in that video, we talked about how we chalk up all of our feelings to the movie being good or not good. And thus, if somebody feels different, we decide that their feelings must be wrong. And so with this topic, we're going to go deeper into it. Now, first of all, this is obviously a real phenomenon. You can look at Marvel versus DC, Marvel fans blaming DC fans for this and that, and taking glee in the success of their movies and the failures of others, anywhere you want online. Even when somebody gets cast in one of those movies, they're seen as joining either Team Marvel or Team DC, and then the other fan group doesn't like them. So in getting into this, we're going to talk about emotional indiscretion and how a lot of the things we feel from the outside world are then interpreted as part of watching the movie or coming from the movie. And one of the major ones, the first one I want to talk about, is that our feelings of confirmation, our feelings of our own pride in ourselves, are linked to whether or not what we like is liked by other people. If somebody doesn't know a band or movie that you like, that's actually saying to you that what you like is not actually that important. It's not actually that good. And so we don't just take it as that person having their own feeling, it's actually a threat to us. We get a bad feeling ourselves. So even though that person didn't mean to do it, they harmed us in a subtle way. And so we respond as though someone had done something bad to us. And likewise, our feelings of what's good and what isn't are linked to our overall view of the world. And so if somebody doesn't share that view of what should be held highly and what shouldn't, that actually destabilizes us also. And like we talked about in the propaganda series, we have natural triggers that stop us from having the stability of our worldview threatened. It's not just that somebody does something that goes against our own self-esteem. We actually have a trigger in our minds that makes us not even consider something that would throw us off. Because having a worldview that works is a very important thing. And if something throws off all of that, we then have a hard time making decisions, which can be very dangerous. The speed with which you make decisions can be important. And the way to recognize this, the way that I can pretty much tell that this is a separate thing from people threatening your own self-esteem, is that it gives you a different feeling. When somebody destabilizes you, you get what I call destabilization sickness, which is a nauseous feeling in your stomach. It was also described in that clip I used in the propaganda series where Miles Dyson, when he finds out that all his work led to a nuclear holocaust, said he felt like he was going to throw up. Now, in one interpretation, you could say that imagining all those people getting hurt would make you sick to your stomach. But I actually think it's something else. Because your body needs to have a way to give you a bad feeling when you turn out to be wrong that doesn't make you want to harm any other person, because that'll just make your life worse. In this case, it's nobody else's fault if your mental model turns out to be incorrect. And that's where that feeling of sickness or nausea comes in. It makes you feel bad, but it doesn't make you angry towards any individual person. And I always search my own feelings when I try to understand these things we talk about. And I found that if I put myself on Team Marvel, I do get a sick feeling to my stomach if I imagine the thought of DC outperforming Marvel. So that's actually a separate thing going on that also goes into it. But of course, there is in fact that aspect of it confirming our own belief in ourselves and it threatening our belief in ourselves. And when it comes to indiscretion, those feelings of our own value as a person are wrapped up with our feelings of the way the world should be. So anyone who threatens our own personal self-esteem is also in the same emotional place for us as a villain in a movie. And one of the funny things about that is that even though we don't come out and say, if we're DC fans, that Marvel fans are evil, we actually react to them as though they are. We want to see their genre, their preferred type of entertainment fail, because it'll give us pleasure from our worldview being confirmed. It means that what they liked was never really that good. And the same pleasure we get at the end of the movie when the villain fails, if the movie's done right, is the same pleasure we get if the genre or type of music or movie we didn't like turns out not to sell that well. And so you see the same type of good and evil type behaviors without the words in these battles between these different fan groups. And another part of that is that we don't interpret our own feelings correctly. Because we can definitely have our own feelings about things and our own feelings about what we watch. But we can't necessarily project that onto how other people feel about things. We can't necessarily understand that somebody else might watch Iron Man and for different reasons have a completely different feeling. So if we think Iron Man's a great movie because we reacted to it positively, and somebody else comes along and says Iron Man stinks, we get angry because we can't model the way they feel about it. We didn't give our opinion, we just stated the truth. It was already validated by our feelings, and we're just describing them. And so, it means they're a liar. The person must be coming along and trying to tell us something that's clearly not true, and we have a natural instinct that causes us to punish liars. That's why we get angry when someone says something that doesn't check out with our own feelings. It discourages dishonesty, and that gets triggered in this case too. And if the person's not lying, it also means the person must not be that smart, because in our own minds, they must feel the same thing we feel because we only get one emotional reading. And we clearly know what's going on, and this person isn't giving the right answer. In both those cases, that person is not someone who should succeed because they're either not very smart or not honest. And so we also react to them as though they were a villain, even though, again, we don't use that word. Now, this also shows up in other ways too. That feeling of listening to something that's actually good, of it confirming our own taste, stretches into a lot of different types of art and entertainment. If we listen to music that other people don't like, we usually keep it to ourselves. I like to wear headphones all the time, personally. I never let anybody else hear what I'm listening to because I don't like, one, the tension, the worry that someone else is judging my taste. And I've seen in the past that if somebody who I'm friends with doesn't like a song that I like listening to, I genuinely don't like the song as much anymore because that outside emotional attachment disappears. It no longer makes me feel like my taste is correct. And you can interpret that as saying, oh, well, this guy must be a follower or things like that. But if you look at it, you'll find that everybody displays the same pattern of behavior. But this leads us to a really important conclusion. And this is something I want to underline because we see it again here. People genuinely have different feelings about what they watch, and we usually have a hard time dealing with that and accepting that. Since my feelings take into account everything I know and all the things I went through in my own life, and those mix with what I see in the movie, they're never going to match yours or somebody else's with all their own personal experiences. And it helps a lot if we start to at least try to take that into account when we discuss things with other people. Instead of just declaring that they're wrong or getting angry, it might help a little bit. If we start to look at what their experiences might be, maybe they started out reading DC Comics instead of Marvel, and so that's something that represents an early part of how they think, and it means to them perhaps that their parents turned them on to the best things early on, so it's part of their ego and that's important to them. And knowing that, I think, helps us have constructive conversations. Because the truth is, there's really no wrong feeling about a movie, or a book, or music, or anything else.
System 1 does most of the mental work. It happens automatically. We don't have to worry where to put our next foot.
Your instinct doesn't actually lie. It just takes everything into account and gives you the resulting emotion. There are, though, wrong interpretations when we take that feeling and think it comes from a different source. And that's where a lot of our problems come from. But I should say also that you may not want to get rid of this reaction completely. Because when you look at those fan-based battles, those can lead to really, really great entertainment. Like, for example, when Marvel and DC occasionally do Marvel versus DC special events where they publish comics where their characters fight and things like that. The real-world tension and all those real-world feelings of the other fan base being villains and wanting them to fail all come into play in those books. And like we've said, they're really powerful because while we sometimes struggle to create that tension in the book itself, when they happen in the real world, they're as real as it gets. And so those books and those events like Marvel versus DC, or back in the 90s, WWF versus WCW, which so many of us who were wrestling fans wanted to see, and kind of got to see a little bit, they make it really, really special. And so you may recognize that these feelings we have about these topics aren't necessarily the correct interpretation, and maybe we should look at it a different way. But at the end of the day, if you do that, you're not going to have as much fun. So it's your decision. I hope you enjoyed listening to this, and I hope it answered the question. If you have some other topics you think would be interesting for the channel, you can send them to me on social media, on Twitter at StoryBrain1, or on Facebook at Everything Story Channel. Catch you later.